Hi everybody, this is Rajiv here. Welcome to Secureum SafeCast, 8 Questions, Infinite Possibilities. This is a series on Safu with Secureum, where our special guest today is Mehdi Zerouali from Sigma Prime. Sigma Prime is one of the sponsor partners of Secureum's Epoch Zero Bootcamp on smart contract security auditing. Mehdi Zerouali is a co-founder and director of Sigma Prime, a leading Sydney-based blockchain security company. Mehdi has been in the information security industry for 10 years and has performed hundreds of security assessments targeting critical infrastructure. With Sigma Prime, Mehdi applies his skills to the blockchain space, helping prominent projects secure their decentralized protocols. Welcome, Mehdi. Thanks for coming on Secureum SafeCast series on Safu with Secureum. So, Mehdi, let's start with some introductions. Tell us a bit about yourself and Sigma Prime.
Rajiv, thanks for having me, and thanks for leading this amazing initiative with Secureum. It's definitely much needed. As you said, I'm co-founder and director of Sigma Prime. Prior to that, I was a penetration tester and a manager for a pen testing team working at a Big Four firm, servicing financial services, telcos, and government agencies, essentially trying to find bugs in my clients' software and infrastructure. So Sigma Prime, as you mentioned, is a blockchain security firm, mostly based out of Sydney, New South Wales, Australia, even though we've been hiring people all over the globe lately. We're a blockchain security firm, meaning that we pretty much only work with blockchain projects. Some of the service offerings that we have is essentially around smart contract security auditing. That's the reason why we're here, but also core blockchain protocol reviews. So we've worked quite extensively with other blockchain projects trying to help them secure their core software. We do all sorts, so we can work on traditional security stuff, but it's not really something that we're really interested in, even though we, in some cases, some blockchain projects do want us to review what we call off-chain components, essentially targeting other parts of the stack that aren't directly related to smart contracts. Some of the cool stuff, I guess, that we're busy with include red teaming engagements for blockchain projects, meaning that some clients can come to us, give us a list of people, a list of buildings, a list of IT assets that we're authorized to play with. And the idea is to try to compromise the organization through some of these attack vectors. So that's Sigma Prime in a nutshell. We will be celebrating our 5-year anniversary later this month.
So maybe the fun format of SafeCast is that we have only 8 questions that we'll be discussing. And in the spirit of programming language nerdiness, the questions are 0 index from 0 to 7. So let's start with question 0. This is about some more context on Sigma Prime and its involvement specifically in the Ethereum security space. What kind of audits and projects is Sigma Prime involved with in this space? What does your team look like? And what are your special focus areas, if any? Also, how do you see all this changing moving forward?
Sure, absolutely. So perhaps the thing to clarify is that Sigma Prime, as some people might have seen, is also the developer and maintainer of Lighthouse, a Rust implementation of the new Ethereum consensus proof of stake mechanism. So ETH2, as people sometimes refer to it, is a much anticipated and much expected upgrade to the Ethereum network, which will hopefully lead to a 99.8% save in energy and electricity consumption. So we'll be hopefully getting rid of miners and replacing them with validators in the near future. So Sigma Prime is not a development company. This is a very special project that we are undertaking. And I'd say that half of our team is dedicated to Lighthouse, while the other half is working on smart contract security and other blockchain security assessments. We are a team of roughly 20 people. And as I said, we've been around for 5 years now. Some of our clients, at least some of the clients that I can mention, include Chainlink, Synthetics, Aave, Lido, Protocol Labs, Filecoin, and of course the Ethereum Foundation. The way we see our team evolve in the near future is by hopefully trying to hire more and train more auditors. This is the reason why we're very, very excited to be part of the Secureum initiative. And these days, I'd say that a lot of projects that we're getting on the smart contract security front are DeFi related, which is not really surprising considering how popular this has become. Yeah, this has kept us really, really busy over the past few months. But we're also very, very excited to be involved in other initiatives. In terms of the broader Ethereum security perspective, Sigma Prime is also leading and maintaining a set of fuzzing frameworks for the Ethereum Foundation. The project is called Beacon Fuzz, and this essentially allows us to spot and identify critical vulnerabilities on all Ethereum consensus clients. And this is something that we've been working on for the past year and a half, very closely with the Ethereum Foundation and other client teams. And the idea is to perform fuzzing. So just to sort of clarify what fuzzing is for our listeners, it's essentially a process whereby you instruct the fuzzing engine to produce a whole heap of randomized inputs. Those inputs are fed into functions that you want to target against the code that you're reviewing. And the idea is to try to trigger panics or software crashes and identify how those panics occurred, and hopefully allow developers to understand a bit better certain edge cases that they may not have necessarily thought of during the development lifecycle. What we do as well on Beacon Fuzz, we take that a step further and we perform what we call differential fuzzing. Obviously, when you have all these different clients implementing the same specification, they should all behave the same way based on a certain input. So what we essentially do is try to feed these inputs on all existing Ethereum consensus implementations and compare the output. So in this case, we're not only trying to trigger crashes or panics in the assessed software, but we're also trying to find discrepancies between these implementations. And the idea is to hopefully try to spot consensus split or consensus related bugs that could potentially lead to a chain split before they actually hit production.
So in the context of Lighthouse, your Ethereum 2.0 client, I guess everyone is anticipating the big merge that's upcoming. So was your team involved in the recently held merge exercise as well?
Absolutely. Thanks for bringing this up. So very recently, a few days ago, we all met in a location in Europe with the Ethereum Foundation, with the researchers responsible for coming up with the E2 specification, along with all the client teams and implementers. So the idea was to try to work on the merge, which will hopefully happen sooner rather than later. I think people don't necessarily realize how close this is. We have a first upgrade to the Beacon chain that will happen at the end of October, on the 27th of October. This first hard fork of the Beacon chain is named Altair, and this essentially is on track to hitting mainnet, as I said, on the 27th of October. And the next upgrade to the Beacon chain will allow the merge of the execution layer and the consensus layer. So about 35, 40 people got together last week and worked really, really hard on this very, very important upgrade for the Ethereum network. As I mentioned earlier, the idea is to try to save as much as 99.8% of energy consumption, and we've the progress that was made throughout the week was really astonishing. We came in, quite prepared to try and iron out bugs and work on interoperability with a bunch of other execution clients, but also the other consensus clients. And through a very, very tough week, we managed to produce a long-standing testnet, which allows 4 consensus clients and 3 execution clients to interop and go through the merge hard fork for the first time. So this was extremely satisfying and extremely exciting. I think a bunch of people may have seen some screenshots and pictures over Twitter last week. And I'm extremely happy with the involvement of Sigma Prime with Lighthouse, as we were one of the leading implementations during that workshop, allowing people to test their interoperability against our software, and the Lighthouse/Get combination was one of the very, very first ones to sort of exist and work throughout this merge fork. So lots of great stuff came out of this week. We probably saved a good 3 to 4 months worth of work just by being all together in the same place, picking each other's brains and ironing out some of those interoperability bugs. And I'd really, really like to thank everyone who was involved in organizing this, Tim, Danny, Trent, but also our very generous sponsor who managed to get us all together in the same place. So yeah, very exciting times for Ethereum. I think a bunch of us, I know Lighthouse, for example, was started to help with the transition to proof of stake. So this is really great to see on our end, knowing that it's pretty much around the corner. I can't obviously give you guys dates at this point, but we're hopefully looking at a merge in Q1, maybe very, very early Q2 next year.
Okay, so Lighthouse, your Ethereum 2.0 client, is a big focus at Sigma Prime. And like you mentioned, an equally big focus is your Ethereum smart contract security audits. So question 1 is about this audit process. What does a typical audit process lifecycle look like at Sigma Prime? What kind of clients do you typically engage with? What techniques, tools, and environment do you use while performing these audits? How do your auditors split their time, and on what aspects do they do so with a typical project? It'll be great if you can share some broad insights into these aspects.
Absolutely, that's a great question. A question that comes up quite often when we speak with our clients before getting started on those security assessments. So the kind of clients that we engage with are usually well-funded, prominent projects. Some of them have had security reviews done in the past. And yet, they still want to get Sigma Prime's eyes over their code bases. So I did mention some of the people that we work with quite closely, Chainlink, Aave, Protocol Labs, Synthetics, and all those guys. There's a few exciting projects that should be released over the next few days, and you'll see Sigma Prime being involved in those as well. I can't really disclose them as of yet. They're not publicly launched, but stay tuned. Some interesting stable coins will probably make their way into mainnet over the next few days, weeks. The typical security assessment lifecycle with Sigma Prime is as follows. So you basically engage with us, contact us. We provide you with a scope, a quote. So essentially, this is where my part of the job is kicks in very early on. The idea is to come up with a certain amount of effort that we need to perform in order to get a decent level of security assurance. Obviously, security assessments are time-boxed engagements, meaning that the more time you give us to spend on your code base, the more chances we have of finding bugs, right? So it's our job to try to find the right balance between our clients' budgets and, of course, their security assessment requirements. So once that's sort of done, we agree on a scope, we agree on a timeline. We request the projects to share with us as much documentation as possible, right? So essentially, we want to spend our time finding bugs and not reverse engineering how the protocol should actually work. So the more documentation, the merrier. And once we get started, we basically spend a lot of time diving into the specification, the design, potentially asking questions, clarifying certain assumptions that would be making, and yeah, it's then time probably after a couple of days to get started. And the way we do this is by having a combination of a manual review and also some dedicated, tailored testing. So we usually split the engagement team in two. Half of the team will be performing a thorough manual review, while the other half will be writing tests. The way we write tests at Sigma Prime is by using a Python-based framework called Brownie. I'm sure a bunch of you folks have been playing with it, or at least have heard of it. We're not massive fans of JavaScript at Sigma Prime, so we did build our own Python-based testing framework a few years ago, and we're extremely happy to see Brownie emerge. And we basically ported all our testing to use this great Python-based framework. It's usually something that's quite interesting for our clients in the sense that perhaps 95% of them do write their tests using the JavaScript framework. Truffle back in the days, Hard Hat these days, or other sorts of Mocha-based JavaScript testing frameworks, which means that by the end of the review, you not only get standard security assessment report outlining your vulnerabilities and recommendations, but you also get a fully fledged test suite that you can then hook into your CI and use in conjunction with your own testing framework. So a bunch of our clients have actually been extremely grateful for these test suites and have integrated them into their CI. And it's always great to see. So as I said, usually 50% of our time is spent testing. We always aim for full code coverage, obviously trying to test for as many edge cases as possible, and the 50% of them sort of manual review where we inspect the code line by line, make sure that there aren't any known anti-patterns. And what we like to do usually is to swap those two teams around. So as I said, we get started by having half of the team on testing, half of the team on manual review, and perhaps after 75% of the engagement completion time, we swap these teams around. Now the team that was doing testing is doing manual review, and the team that was doing the manual review is sledging out tests. So we then all get together, compare our notes, challenge each other's assumptions and findings, and write a nice report. Obviously, we really hate wasting our clients' time with false positives. So we always want to make sure that anything that goes into the report has been thoroughly validated, usually with an actual test scenario, which is then shared with our client in that testing framework that I mentioned. So it's really about thorough testing. We have an internal checklist of common mistakes and vulnerabilities that can occur on smart contracts. We use existing open source tools for static analysis, but these are usually low-hanging fruits that can be identified using these tools. So we actually recommend our clients to run these tools before engaging us. So yeah, it's a lot of manual review, a lot of testing, and I guess what's kind of unique to Sigma Prime is, in our approach at least, is that we produce not only a report, as I mentioned, but also a fully fledged test suite.
With question 2, I would like to dig a little deeper into some of the things that you just mentioned. One, how many of your projects have reasonable documentation, if not a full-fledged specification? And 2, you mentioned about splitting your assessment teams into 2 parts and swapping them after a while. Can you maybe tell us a bit more about the reason for doing so and how does it actually help? And finally, auditing today is a fairly manual process, as we know. So how do you approach that in the context of the automated tooling that's available and perhaps used within Sigma Prime? And how do you see this aspect changing in the near future?
Sure. There's a lot to unpack in your question. Let's dive straight into it. So the first thing that you mentioned is the first thing you asked, sorry, is how many clients do have decent documentation. If you had asked me this question maybe 18 months ago, my response would have been almost none. People are extremely busy, building their code base. They hopefully understand their protocol quite well and don't think of documenting these things properly. I think over the last 18 months, we've seen a massive change in that regard, meaning that people do understand the benefit of properly writing things down, properly documenting the assumptions that they're making. And I think, we've been saying this for a while. I know a bunch of our sister companies have been hammering their clients as well with this. And finally, I can probably comfortably say that most, if not all, the people that we work with do have extensive documentation. It's almost a requirement to work with us. We're not really comfortable these days, particularly when dealing with massive, complex code bases, not having sort of anything to go back to clarify any assumptions that the development team had made. So that's a real positive, I think, for the space. The fact that we have a lot more documentation available for our security assessments. Why do we split the team? So that's also a great question. One of the things that you realize as an auditor is that as you go through the code that you're reviewing, you perhaps are starting to make a lot of the same assumptions that the developers are making. And I'll clarify this. By reading the comments, by reading the extensive detailed design, you might not even help yourself in starting to make the same shortcuts and making, again, the same assumptions that the development team is making without even realizing, right? So the reason why we usually ask our testers, the team that's responsible for testing, to do that without diving too much into the code base, without, obviously they need to understand the interfaces, the APIs that they're hitting, but we try to get them, get them to have an independent sort of mindset when dealing with our clients' code bases, and that is usually quite interesting in trying to find some intricate business logic flows that you may not be able to identify solely with manual reviews. As I said, your understanding and of the protocol might get tainted by the assumptions that the developers have made. So it's really important for us to free ourselves from these constraints and assumptions, and that's what the testing team does. And the reason why we swap them around, is to hopefully get the testing team to now understand a bit better why their tests are behaving the way they're behaving, right? Why certain functions return certain given values, why particularly with the DeFi space, there's a lot of interconnection between different components. Composability is massive for Ethereum, and that's something that we see a lot these days. And it's always good to try to approach the testing process in a sandbox manner, at least for the first, as I said, 70% of the engagement time, and then really trying to understand the links, the externalities of the system that we review, and that's usually we find that approach to be really good at yielding business logic flows, right? So you have your standard, mistakes or pitfalls that developers may make when dealing with Solidity. You've been covering a lot of that with Secureum. Very grateful for that. Things like reentrancy, overflows, etc. But I think the most interesting vulnerabilities that we find are business logic related, and having two teams doing the manual review and the testing separately and swapping them around is, again, in our experience, something that yields great results. Automation is obviously a big thing for the security space in general, I'd say. probably agree with me on this. The InfoSec space has always been big on automation, trying to replace manual intervention with software, scripting, etc., etc. That's something to consider, of course. I've mentioned some of the static analyzers that we use, and as I said, we try to get our clients to use them before even engaging with Signify. Now, it really depends who you ask. If you ask me whether we'll be able to replace manual reviews with automation completely, I'd say no chance, right? A lot of the stuff that we find cannot be sort of the business logic of finding these things cannot be automated. It really is about understanding fundamental aspects of the protocol and really trying to take it one step further in terms of edge cases and implementing those edge cases in test scenarios. So automation, yes. And as I said, I'm really glad that we have public open source tooling now that our clients can use. Our friends at Trailsbits have done a great job at coming up with Slither. Mithril is also one of them that came out of a consensus diligence. I do think there's definite value in running these tools, but unfortunately, or fortunately for us, this won't ever replace the manual work that our team does.
This is a good segue to question 3, because you mentioned common pitfalls and best practices and how automated tooling helps detect some of them. But a significant effort in an assessment is still focused on manual analysis to detect the business logic specific vulnerabilities in the application code itself. So in this context, during an audit or assessment, how much of your team's effort goes into evaluating the so-called economic attacks compared to or contrasted from the technical ones that are code-specific vulnerabilities? How do your teams approach this during an assessment?
Sure. I guess with the democratization of flashpots, things like front running are extremely important for our clients. So we always try to look for ways to abuse the trust model and security assumptions when it comes to understanding the overall attack surface that's available to potential malicious actors when dealing with these DeFi projects. One thing perhaps that's worth mentioning is that we Signal Prime do not make a judgment on the protocol itself, right? We do try to look for economic attacks as a byproduct of our review, but it's important to understand that we don't judge, right? If we think an idea is not necessarily sustainable in the long run for various economic reasons, it's not necessarily our job to outline that. We might have a very strong opinion on certain protocols, but we do try to stick to the implementation of the design that came out of our client's team. So it's always a fine line whereby I've reviewed a bunch of projects and I've often been like, there's no way this thing can work, right? For various reasons, not from a security standpoint, but from an overall sustainability when sort of dealing with lots of massive market movements, be it like massive pumps or massive dumps. It's important to understand the limitation of our work, right? We're not here to judge whether a certain model is deemed sustainable in the long run. We're here to make sure that users are sort of safe when it comes to dealing within the boundaries that were established by the protocol, right? So if we agree on those boundaries, then we try to find ways to break those assumptions and exit those boundaries. But economic attacks are often a byproduct of our review. We do highlight certain type of issues that are perhaps dealing with oracle manipulation and front running and things like that. But these today, in my opinion, are pretty much application specific vulnerabilities. They're not even considered economic attacks, as you mentioned. Crypto economics and game theory is kind of part of what we do. but we're certainly not here to judge the sustainability of some of these protocols in the very long run. We're here to make sure that the implementation of that given design is sane.
So far, we have talked about several technical aspects. So maybe let's switch gears a bit and talk about talent. Onboarding new talent to the Ethereum security space is one of the biggest motivations for Secureum, as you know. So, for anyone aspiring to get into this space, the Ethereum security space, or maybe the smart contract auditing space in particular, how do you think they can catch up with all the technical skills required and build a reputation for themselves? Their prior professional experience, be it in Web 2 or Web 3, may help. But what do you think of participating in bounties, hackathons, or maybe even some of the more recent structured efforts, such as the Secureum Bootcamp itself?
I think Secureum is an amazing initiative. To be honest, I think the exposure that the cohort will get, hopefully by the end of the first Epoch Zero, is probably second to none. The doing bounties certainly helps. I also believe that joining a firm like Sigma Prime can provide you with extensive and thorough training is a nice way of building the skill set and the confidence, and also ultimately your reputation. I do think that what you're doing, Rajiv, with Secureum is really incredible, and people know that it's very difficult to book in auditors these days, and that's just a direct consequence of the shortage of talent, I'd say, that we have in space. The way we've been approaching this with Sigma Prime is to try to get security engineers or security-minded people that don't necessarily have strong technical exposure to Ethereum, but are somewhat interested in this space and certainly are keen in diving into the technicalities and the intricacies of the EVM. And we basically, try and train them up for, however long is necessary, sometimes a couple of months, sometimes longer, and have them, shadow some of our more experienced testers on actual client engagements. And we find that the progress that some of those people are making is really, really, really promising and really astonishing in some cases. So to answer your question perhaps more directly, I do believe that joining Secureum is probably going to be a game changer for a bunch of the students of your cohort. Being able to find vulnerabilities on bug bounties is always a plus. And by all means, feel free to have a look at Immunify and perhaps even HackerOne, BugCrowd, and all these platforms to look for blockchain-related, Ethereum-related targets and get your fingers dirty, try to find bugs in those. In terms of reputation, prior professional experience is always a plus, I guess. So if perhaps your client knows that you've been doing security work in the past 10 years, they might be a bit more, confident in flicking you that type of work. But ultimately joining a firm like ours with dedicated, extensive training is probably one of the best ways to go.
Thank you for the kind words about Secureum. I think we are all in this together as a community to help onboard new talent into the space, which is much needed, as we know. Help them, inspire them, onboard them onto the space, and then just learn together and work together to help make Ethereum safer. So thanks for that. This is actually a great segue to the next question, which is somewhat personal. How did you yourself get introduced to smart contract or blockchain security? And what is the most challenging or fascinating thing about it that attracted you to it and inspired you to co-found Sigma Prime 5 years ago, which is widely recognized as one of the top companies in the space, and still, keeps you and your company going in all these fascinating high impact directions with Ethereum 2.0 and smart contract security assessments and so on. So I'm sure there's a very inspirational story behind that, which all of us would love to know.
So I had heard of Bitcoin back in 2011. I remember spending a decent amount of time diving into it, understanding it, understanding the UTXO model and whatnot. It never really sparked any really strong interest beyond just like simple intellectual curiosity. I did try to understand as much as possible without obviously, spending too much time either. I was a security engineer, as a penetration tester doing ethical hacking for my clients, and yeah, I had heard of Bitcoin fairly early on. I remember very clearly the day Ethereum was explained to me, which was a few months before the actual mainnet launch. And I remember very distinctly that my mind was completely blown. And from that moment, that was pretty much the only thing I was thinking of for the next, 6 months. So really trying to consume as much content as possible, really trying to understand the EVM, digesting the white paper, digesting the yellow paper. Back then, the community wasn't as big. So we were able to kind of reach out to some of the prominent members of the community back then to clarify certain points. We were involved in the local Sydney blockchain scene. So, just giving talks and trying to give back to the community and trying to explain things as we understood them. And yeah, it was really Ethereum that got me into the blockchain space, I'd say. And the blockchain security in particular, I remember coming across Martin Swender's blogs. So for those of you who don't know who Martin is this legend who saved the Ethereum network so many times, by the way. And he was very critical in identifying critical vulnerabilities very, very early on affecting the EVM. Some of his blog posts, I think, date from, back 2015, 2016. And really seeing his approach was really interesting to me. Coming from a security background, it was seeing a security person applying their skill set to the EVM and Ethereum in general. So it really sparked a very, very particular interest for me, and quite early on, I did realize that there was going to be a massive need for security researchers, security engineers for this new space. Yeah, very, very grateful for what Martin did and keeps doing. So he's probably think of him as the head of security for the Ethereum Foundation. He also works quite closely with the Geth team, the Go Ethereum team. And yeah, I don't think if it wasn't for Martin, I probably wouldn't be here today. So thanks for all you've done, Martin. There's obviously lots going on in the Ethereum space. So I think there's one thing that perhaps worth putting out there is that it really helps if you're passionate. Right? If you're not, there's probably no way you're going to be able to keep up with all the new stuff that comes out of this wonderful ecosystem. There's so much reading to be done. I feel like I'm constantly catching up on the latest protocol developments, the latest security attack vectors, security vulnerabilities, etc. So unless you're really passionate about this stuff, I think you might find it quite difficult to be successful. So we're very lucky at Sigma Prime, the fact that we're all very passionate about this stuff. We really want to see Ethereum succeed, even though, as probably you can tell, Sigma Prime is blockchain agnostic. We've worked with a bunch of other blockchains, helping them secure their core layers, but 90%, perhaps more the work that we do is dedicated to Ethereum. So the ethos of this ecosystem is definitely in line with Sigma Prime's values, and we find it quite easy to keep up with stuff when we're passionate. Lighthouse was started to make an impact and help us save a bunch of electricity, and that's the reason why Paul started it. He was like, "This is completely ludicrous that we are consuming so much electricity. There's a way of doing things differently." And he's been working on Lighthouse for the past 3.5 years, and it's certainly very exciting to see it come to fruition. So keeping motivated and keeping up to date with stuff, if you're passionate, is doesn't really feel like work, if that makes sense. And as I said, we're extremely passionate about this stuff at Sigma.
This next question is another interesting, non-technical, personal question. As someone heading Sigma Prime, do you even attempt to have a work-life balance of some sort, where the demand for your work and time is obviously so high, and so are the stakes of something potentially going wrong in the projects that your teams may have audited? How do you cope with the stress of wondering if your teams may have missed something that could potentially lead to millions of dollars in exploits? Does this keep you up at night? Yeah. How do you deal with it?
That's an interesting question that actually comes up quite often, particularly amongst my friends. So how do I cope? I exercise a lot. I try to exercise a lot pretty much every day when I'm not on the road. But it's tricky, right? We have a team of 20 people, so there's lots to do at Sigma Prime as one of the co-founders and directors. So really just trying to make sure that there's some sort of work-life balance, but more importantly, really getting a pulse of where you're at on a personal level, and really trying to identify potential burnout points before they actually occur, and taking time off, be it like a day every now and then, or like a week off where possible, is really critical. And that's something the good thing with Sigma Prime is it's headed by 3 people. There's 3 directors, 3 co-founders, and we keep each other in check, right? If I see one of my co-founders starting to get a bit grumpy and very tired, then we really try to encourage them to take time off whenever it's possible. Like in some cases, we just have to suck it up and keep working. But we really try to be aware of this, and it's not easy. But having 2 amazing co-founders definitely helps. Something that perhaps worth mentioning is that we really try not to inflict all this pressure to our staff, right? It's not acceptable for my staff to be stressed out by this intense ecosystem that we work in. So we really try to get them to disconnect and work normal hours, and hopefully not feel too much pressure related to their day-to-day activities. Something as well that people kind of have to be at peace with is the fact that you will probably miss bugs, right? I think Sigma Prime's been lucky enough not to have any direct mainnet related incident that incurred too much loss for our clients. We obviously, try our best to find all vulnerabilities that may be affecting our client code bases. But hey, as I mentioned, these are time box engagements. In some cases, people really want to work with us, but aren't necessarily keen on giving us all the time that we requested. So it might actually happen that something might be missed. And I think people just need to be at peace with that. It's all about communication with our clients, and really making them understand that it's a time box engagement. So it's again, touch wood, it's something that we had to experience too much at Sigma Prime, but the work-life balance, I think, starts getting better when you're a bit at peace with these things. Obviously, I mentioned some of the protocols we work with Chainlink, Aave. These things power billions of dollars of value. So obviously there is an inherent stress related to working with these clients, but it's also an amazing opportunity for Sigma Prime. A lot of people sort of reach out to us after reading our reports, and they're just grateful for the work that we do, be it standard users or investors or other security people who are just getting into the space and are interested, and they find our reports, they look at our tests, and they're like, oh, that's cool. That's actually, you've applied this approach that I had in my previous, sort of traditional security job, and it's great to see that you're doing, doing things thoroughly. So getting those messages is really, really inspiring and keeps us moving, and makes the work-life balance, I guess, a bit easier to manage. But for me, what works for me is exercise. There's other things that work for other people, but I try to keep myself busy and exercise as much as I can to deal with the stress associated with this amazing industry of ours.
For the eighth and the final question, I would like to again ask a broader one around Sigma Prime as a company. Sigma Prime clearly has a lot of expertise both in the traditional Web2 information security space and specifically deeply in the Ethereum space with both smart contract assessments and the development of the Lighthouse Ethereum 2.0 client. But looking ahead, if you were to bring out your crystal ball, how do you see Sigma Prime growing and differentiating in this space? And from the other perspective, why should someone want to really work at Sigma Prime over some of the other reputable teams in this space?
So there's a few things to unpack here. I think our positioning is quite unique, right? I don't think there are that many security auditors that are also building a core consensus client for Ethereum. This allows us to have a very strong relationship with other players in the field. The Ethereum Foundation, I think it's safe to say that we've managed to really gain the trust of key members of the Ethereum Foundation. So working with Sigma Prime ultimately will give you an exposure that's quite unique. If you're very passionate about Ethereum, very passionate about helping Ethereum in the long run, working with Sigma Prime is probably one of the places where you probably make the most impact, I'd say. Our positioning with Lighthouse is quite unique. We're involved in core protocol security as well, not just smart contracts, right? A bunch of players in the space are focusing exclusively on smart contract auditing. That's definitely something that keeps us busy, don't get me wrong, but we also aren't afraid of diving into lower layers, lower levels of the stacks that we deal with. And that's quite interesting if, for people who are into fuzzing, who are into low level constructions, it's quite a nice place to be at and be exposed to these technologies. How it's gonna sort of work out in the medium long run. Well, we're hopefully gonna try to scale up and hire more auditors. Hopefully, Secureum will help with that. We're also thinking of potentially working on security tooling and security products that could be leveraged by the industry to, without disclosing too much, help with not necessarily smart contract security stuff, but other parts of the stack. And as we were talking about automation, I do think that manual reviews cannot be replaced, but I also think that there's a lot of stuff that we can automate to help our clients pick up some of the findings that we would usually pick up, right? So we'll be most likely over the coming weeks, months, working on some security tooling that will hopefully be shared with the broader community at some point. I think I mentioned Beacon Fuzz. That's a very one of the most interesting projects I've ever worked on. Really trying to understand the Ethereum consensus specification as deeply as possible, and trying to find bugs that would cause real harm on the network. I believe we are now up to 43 or 44 vulnerabilities identified with this tool, and a lot of them are actually critical vulnerabilities that could have made their way into mainnet, and if exploited, would have had catastrophic implications for our beacon chain. So yeah, working with Sigma Prime, I think, gives you that unique exposure into the future of Ethereum, into the roadmap of Ethereum. We are definitely one of the leading implementers, and working really, really closely with very smart people to make the future of Ethereum a reality. We take pride in having, our staff well-being is extremely important to us, right? There's, lots of ways of putting pressure on your staff to get more done in a shorter amount of time. We don't really believe in that. We really our greatest assets are our people, and we really want our people to feel comfortable, be happy in their working environment, and that's our number one priority. This is probably also why Sigma Prime is still a relatively small-ish consultancy. It's only 20 of us, and we never want to grow just to grow our book of business. We really want people who join us to be on the same page when it comes to the values that we think are worth fighting for. And obviously, we've been turning down so much work just to make sure that their schedule is stays reasonable. And we don't want people to work too hard or overwork, and we really, really, really take great pride in the well-being of our staff, if that makes sense.
So with that, we have covered 8 questions, question 0 to question 7. But let's take the liberty to overflow a bit and look at question number 8. This one is on smart contracts versus other components of a project you're reviewing. Say their Web 2 front ends or other parts of the stack, or more importantly, their off-chain components. So when you're reviewing such a project that has these other components besides the smart contracts, how often or serious are vulnerabilities in such components compared to smart contracts themselves? Do you see big differences, challenges in vulnerabilities found in smart contracts versus their Web 2 or off-chain components? Is one of them more harder to detect or exploit than the other? What are your thoughts?
Sure. So that's a really good point. Actually, we do go down the stack, right? When our clients want us to, meaning that let me take, for example, chain, right? We've got a set of smart contracts that are deployed on mainnet, but you do have a Golang node that is being run by operators, right? Finding a way to crash those nodes could have catastrophic implications for the overall network, right? It's not just about smart contracts. The entire stack is also very, very important in some cases. In other cases, you mentioned dApps. You basically, your stack is only composed in some cases of a smart contract and a front end, right? In this case, looking at your standard web application security type flows, things like cross-site scripting, cross-site request forgery, basically client-side vulnerabilities is also extremely important, right? Because if I can find a way of perhaps changing the contract address that a victim could see by simply getting them to click on a malicious link, that can be bad, right? And that's happened in the past. People have found XSS vulnerabilities and have exploited them. thinking of Ether Delta back in the days, for example, and that's definitely something that our clients need to be aware of. Now, it's not necessarily something that we would do, and I'll explain why. That's certainly something that we can do, right? We definitely do have the skill set, but is it the best use of our time? Perhaps not, right? So, smart contract auditors aren't necessarily cheap. And there's a bunch of great security firms out there, traditional security firms out there, that can do an amazing job at helping you secure your web application, right? Now, we can do this as well, but our recommendation is usually to, potentially hire someone else, and usually happy to give introductions for our clients. But the best use of our time is probably not necessarily on the front end type stuff, if that makes sense. So that's how we try to communicate with our clients. Yes, it's important that you secure your front end. Yes, it's important that you secure your deployment, your front end deployment, and your sort of cloud infrastructure, etc. We can do it, but other people can do it as well. So having said that, a bunch of our clients come to us and say, no, we actually want you to do it. So we do end up reviewing front end, reviewing AWS, Google Cloud, Azure deployments as well. But I'd say if you want to get the best value out of hiring Sigma Prime, you're better off getting us to review your smart contracts. You're better off getting us to review your core layers. So the example that I gave with Chainlink is probably a good one, illustrating that our expertise can be leveraged on other parts of the stack, not only smart contracts. But for the web application side, security stuff, again, there's plenty of great companies out there that can do a good job at that. Our preference is, to maximize the value that our clients get from our time, and it is usually by having us review, off-chain stuff, but off-chain related to on-chain components, right? So the example that I gave with Chainlink is one of them.
So to conclude, if you had just one recommendation for aspiring Ethereum smart contract security auditors, say someone who would love to join the Sigma Prime team, what would that be? And also, if you had just one request for protocols that would like to get the best out of an audit from Sigma Prime, what would that be?
Great question. I'd say for aspiring auditors, one piece of advice that I usually give is don't be scared of complexity. Embrace it. Dive into the intricacies of the EVM. Dive into the complexities of our space. This is what makes our ecosystem interesting, right? Is that it's quite complex to get right. So it's really about not being afraid of diving deep down into the stack. And hopefully, by now, 2021. There's a bunch of documentation, a bunch of resources. Again, Secureum is doing an amazing job at putting that content together and really consume as much of it as possible. Ask questions as well, right? Don't be afraid of asking questions. There's lots of communities around that are more than happy to help. You have the Secureum Discord, which is a great place to hang out if you have security related questions on Ethereum. And don't be afraid of the complexity. There's a lot of stuff, and no one's expecting you to know all this stuff from day one. It does take time. As I mentioned, we do hire people who don't necessarily have strong EVM security expertise, but as long as they're willing to dive into stuff and understand the complexities and not shy away from them, then they'll most likely be successful. For projects, I mentioned documentation. That's definitely a big one. So please document your protocol. Document it more than what you think is necessary. Because some stuff might make sense to you, but by writing them up, you'll actually find that you've been making poor assumptions, right? So the documentation process itself is a really good preparation for a security assessment from conducted by a team like Sigma Prime. Testing is also a big one. I really, really like projects that have full testing coverage, right? Which means that they've been quite thorough in their approach of approaching security. Testing is very important. As we mentioned earlier, Sigma Prime will provide their own test suite, but obviously that cannot replace internal unit testing conducted by the development team. And last but not least, planning. We're extremely busy. I know our sister companies are also extremely busy these days. So if you know you're going to need a security assessment done in like 6 months' time, 9 months' time, there's no such thing as too early these days. So please reach out early on. And I can probably confidently say that if you reach out to us for a security assessment to be conducted in like a month or two, that's not going to be enough time for us to assist, right? So planning. Think ahead. Don't start thinking about security audits when you're done developing, right? Start thinking about these things very early on and reach out to the right firms very, very, very early.
All right, we have covered 8 questions as promised and overflowed a bit as well. So that's a wrap. Thank you, Mehdi, for coming on Secureum SafeCast in the Safu with Secureum CDs and sharing your thoughts on 8 questions, infinite possibilities. Good luck to you and Sigma Prime in making Ethereum safer for all of us. It goes without saying that Secureum would be very keen to assist you in making that mission successful. And I look forward to having you again on Secureum SafeCast sometime soon.
Thank you, Rajiv. It's been great. Thanks so much for having me. And thanks again for the great work you're doing at Secureum.